Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're so happy that you're here with us. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility.
Hello and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're so glad you're here. It's an honor to walk with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. I'm Jillian from the Springs in the Desert team, your host for today's Desert Reflection, one of our mini episodes that we bring to you every other week. And joining me today is Christina. It's so good to be here with you, Christina. How are you?
Good, Jillian. Thank you.
Good. Today, we want to chat a little bit about one of Springs in the Desert's mottos, which is that we focus on Christ and not on conception. Christina, I'm not sure about you, but in a lot of conversations that I have with family or medical professionals or friends, that it's typically surrounding conception, this sort of goal, if you will, which isn't quite the term that we love to use here at Springs in the Desert, but this idea about conception. And I think sometimes it misses what's happening spiritually in our hearts. And even though it's good to know what the church teaches about conception and how our bodies work and meeting with medical professionals, that's so good. But sometimes when we're so focused on conception, we forget our spiritual lives. So I'm wondering, can you relate to that experience, Christina? Has that been your experience?
Yeah. So, I think just to emphasize, like the desire to conceive is a holy, beautiful desire, and it is precious, and it's, we were made for that. But as you said, yes, when it becomes an idol, when it's all we think about, when it's our whole lives just are revolving around it, and it's the relationships around us, we can tell, are just kind of negatively impacted, then it's kind of time to refocus and say, okay, maybe, I'm neglecting my spiritual life. Something's a little off kilter. And I think it's tempting too, though, also, when you're suffering with infertility, to try to, I just don't want any kids. You try to like sidestep your suffering and try to convince yourself like, oh, it's going to be okay. Like I don't really want that. And, and that's a temptation too. Like we don't want to sidestep our suffering and try to avoid it. There's no resurrection without the cross. And so it's about, embracing our cross and joining it with Christ. So yes, I definitely can relate. I think it's always a temptation. You got to keep that balance of trying to do things to optimize my fertility, medically, diet, all those different things, but not letting it become an idol, and making sure, as you mentioned, like Christ is first and foremost.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate that you brought up both sides of that, because I now that you say that, I can really remember different times where I maybe fell into either of those, where conception, again, as you said, it is so precious. God put that desire on our hearts. Like we're all here because we have that desire, and that, it is given to us and placed on our hearts. It is such a beautiful gift, but to make sure that it doesn't overtake our lives, so that we don't lose sight of Christ. But then on the other hand, not to just totally like give up on this desire that's, been on our hearts. And perhaps, we definitely have listeners who, are post-hysterectomy or post-menopause that know, maybe a little bit more definitively that they won't be able to carry children of their own. But that doesn't mean they have to give up on fruitfulness and all the ways that God is, all the people he's entrusting to them, and all the ways that he's asking them to serve. And so to not kind of make an idol, on either side. I appreciate that perspective. It's okay to take a break. Certainly. It's okay to, pause from some of those practices, but to not just give up on the Lord and the desires that he's placed. I appreciate that. I think it would be helpful for our listeners to maybe know there's so much wisdom from the church about where we can find hope and what we can do so that we can keep our attention focused on Christ amidst all these other desires. And so I'm wondering, Christina, if you have any suggestions about where we might be able to look in the church for some hope.
Yeah, so recently I'd gone to confession with a priest, and, like we all do, there's a lot of emotions and surrounding, the cross of infertility. But he had recommended just the most wonderful thing. It's called Spe Salvi, SPE space Salvi, S-A-L-V-I, and I will put it in the resources here. But it was a encyclical letter by Pope Emeritus Benedict. He wrote it in 2007. Basically, it's the definition of Christian hope. And there's a lot to it. It's not like you're just going to sit down for 5 minutes and read it. It took me a while. But I enjoyed it because it reminded me of so in life we have greater and lesser hopes, throughout the day. Oh, I hope it, doesn't rain on the party we're going to throw, or, I hope my mom feels better from her sickness, to different extents, there's greater and lesser things. But these hopes are not enough. These are not the great hope. And the great hope is the hope that must surpass all of these lesser hopes. And that hope is Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead and opening the gates of heaven for us. If we have our hope in that, and we know for certain that's the outcome, that's what happened, we are able to weather the storm and the roller coaster of all of our, greater and lesser hopes being fulfilled or not. And so St. Paul said to the Thessalonians, you must not grieve as others do who have no hope. So he was talking about for all the people there that don't have this great hope. Like, yes, we're going to grieve. We're going to grieve when things don't work out the way we want them to, but we will never despair because we know how it ends. So Pope Benedict says in the encyclical, he says, our lives will not end in emptiness. Only when the future is certain as a positive reality does it become possible to live the present as well. So anyways, that's just a brief recap of that encyclical. So I recommend everybody take some time with it because it just helps us refocus on the great hope. Yeah. And that's the hope that we'll never lose.
Wow, that's so good. I've read bits and pieces of Spe Salvi before, but I definitely want to go back and reread it. I'm working through some different encyclicals now, so hopefully I can just add it on to my list and keep reading through. But I love this idea of these greater and lesser hopes. Just because, perhaps we're praying for something like conception, and whether or not that does occur in our lives, we have a greater hope beyond all of those that we have assurance in, and to go to Jesus, to flee to him and focus on him and his gaze. And I think Spe Salvi is a great resource to start with, to maybe redirect our eyes if we're struggling with that today. Christina, thank you so much for joining me on this mini-sode. It's so good to just chat with you and to encourage our listeners to just keep walking with Christ. So listeners, let us know if you take a look at and read Spe Salvi. That'll be linked in the resources. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. If you have a minute, please rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and hear about more things that we have going on. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.